Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven.
Thank you guys all for being here. We are humbled and honored as a city to have this first Juneteenth celebration in the city of Weston, Missouri.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I gotta keep on walking, keep on talking, marching down the...
The two sisters meet in the living room, pore over documents, catch up on cooking tips, hair products, work, worries over children, and siblings aging as they are. The two sisters, whose mother died too soon, are piecing together the timeline of her, their family, their history. The two sisters dig in and they research deeds, records, census, between dishes, meals, work, the confines of everyday life. They reflect on each thing they find and discuss its value like they are nuggets of gold. The two sisters discover two women in their history, one the slave of a reverend, the other owned by a stagecoach king in the small town of Western Missouri. One woman bought her and her family's freedom. They would both own properties. The women who were slaves became sisters, bound by the marriage of their children, who had children, who had children, bringing us to these two sisters today, unearthing clues about their mother, finding their freedom.
You know, my roots run very deep here in Weston, Missouri. My sister Joyce and cohort on this journey of discovery are direct descendants, and we are here to honor and represent Dinah Robinson, Mariah Dayton Vaughn, their husbands, their families, and the entire population of Weston's people of color who were brought here, born here, lived, worked, and died right here in Weston. What then is Juneteenth National Independence Day to Weston? We are part of the 6 counties within the banks of the Missouri River that make up the Platte Purchase, which opened for settlement in 1836, adding 2 million acres of land to our 16-year-old state. And by December of the following year, Platte County was formed, and soon Weston became known as Queen of the Platte Purchase. Southerners came pouring into this rich new land with its vast waterfront off the Missouri River and brought their way of life with them and their enslaved people, which brings us to my people. Generations ago, in the 1840s, my mother's people relocated to Weston with the people who owned them.
As we were brought here from old Kentucky, from the fields of Virginia to Green Platte County, we had our families right here in Weston. This land was made for you and me. We nursed your babies and washed the laundry, did the cooking, cleaning and tending. The golden harvest came after planting. This land was made for you and me. And after freedom, we too bought houses, we paid our taxes and raised our families. We lived among you and died beside you. Weston was made by you and me. Weston was made by you and me. Weston was made by for you and me.
Likened to a human machine with no civil rights, no dignity, no right to vote, no free will, no granted right for education whatsoever. I discovered that according to the 1855 census, there were 2,935 Platte County slaves listed. I also discovered that the combined value of these 2,935 enslaved individuals was valued at a price of $1,264,860.
What is American slavery? The slave is the same as a beast. He toils that another may live in idleness. If a slave mother shall teach her child to read, she may be hanged by the neck. The whip, the dungeon, the bloodhound are all employed.
Would you have me argue that man is entitled to liberty? That he is the rightful owner of his own body? You have already declared it. Must I argue the wrongfulness of slavery? What then remains to be argued? What to the American slave is your 4th of July? I have detained my audience entirely too long already. Some future period, I will gladly avail myself of an opportunity to give this subject a full and fair discussion. Allow me to say in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented on the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work the downfall of slavery. The arm of the Lord is not shortened, and the doom of slavery is certain. I therefore leave off where I began, with hope, while drawing encouragement from the Declaration of Independence, the great principles it contains, and the genius of American institutions. My spirit is also cheered by the obvious tendencies of the age.
Down by the river, east of the village, before the sun came up, people were working. My father told me sacred stories about the village past time. Nobody killing, nobody stealing. Everyone knew their way, everyone willing to help their mothers and their fathers down in the village a long time ago. The people lived in the village where everybody respects you with love. The children knew how to listen good. Everyone looked up, yes, and gave you love. People would care, people were sharing. Everyone knew their way, everyone willing to help their mothers and their fathers down in the village long time ago. Down by the river, east of the village. Down by the river, east of the village. Down by the river, east of the village. Before the sun came up, people were working. My father told me sacred stories about the village that was passed down through time. Down by the river, east of the village. Down by the river, east of the village.
Nobody killing, nobody stealing. Everyone knew their way, everyone willing to help their mothers and their fathers down in the village that was a long time ago.
The people live in the village where everybody respects you with love. The children knew how to listen good. Everyone looked up, yes, and gave you love. People would care, people were sharing. Everyone knew their way, everyone willing to help their mothers and their fathers down in the village a long time ago. Down by the river, east of the village. Down by the river, east of the village.
I have known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world and older than the flow of human blood through human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when dawns were young. I built my hut along the Congo and it lulled me to sleep. And I looked upon the Nile, and I raised pyramids above it. And I heard the singing of the Mississippi when Abe Lincoln went down to New Orleans. And I watched her muddy bosom grow all golden in the sunset. I know rivers, deep, husky rivers. My soul has grown deep like the rivers.
Bukagaya. After the Civil War and the country's very first Juneteenth observance, the Western Missouri Chronicle newspaper published dozens of articles and stories throughout the years regarding the town of Weston's black community. There were African American marriages and stories of mass baptisms in the very same creek in which you sit not far away, running along here. There were rich stories of black American Westerners who were world travelers and U.S. emissaries to European countries. Intriguing stories of a black political elite organizing a large community picnic gathering. Stories of black county school students celebrating the annual May Festival in which the local Weston school was host. From black real estate entrepreneurs to announcements of African American residents who went on to pursue successful exploits in the fields of law and ethnology. African American hardworking taxpayers. Stories of African American teachers, firefighters, mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, grandmothers, and great-grandparents, all from right here in the hallowed grounds and community of Weston, Missouri. Ladies and gentlemen, they were human beings. They had dignity, hope, dreams. They had a heart and soul. They were individuals. And more importantly, they had and have a name.
We're going to have everybody sing this. If you don't know it, once you hear it the first time, it's just a repetition, okay? Okay, good. It's in the program, so you know what you got to do. Here we go. home to my Lord and be free. Next one is no more sighing. Here we go. No more sighing.
5 years after emancipation, black people at last were listed by name on the 1870s U.S. federal census. By two names, as a matter of fact, a first name and a last name of their choosing, along with their approximate age, their complexions, occupation, birthplaces, the name and gender of others in the household, whether they rented or owned their dwellings, and the real estate value of those homes. In researching my ancestors, Dinah Robinson and Mariah Dayton Vaughn, I've learned so very much about Weston's history in general. Did you know that there were at least 3 colored schools and 3 colored churches in Weston? As a matter of fact, there were 3 Underground Railroad stations, 2 of which are proven. So, organized in 1865, the Colored Missionary Baptist Church, now to a residence, stands there on Black Hawk Street. Is it a coincidence that 3 doors down from this church is one of the 3 Underground Railroad stations? In my estimation, this station was most likely the last stop before reaching the free territory of Kansas. Mill Creek runs directly behind it all the way to the Missouri River and to the soon-to-become free state of Kansas and beyond.
because life is joyful.
Life is joyful. Life is joyful. Life is joyful over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. And be free.
Yes, indeed. Freedom is a joyful thing.
Now here in Weston, you understand the hierarchy was the slave culture. It was the plantation. It was a huge river port, and the hemp rope was all, it takes a lot of hand labor to make hemp, and the hemp rope was really important for the cotton industry down south. And this was between here and Roachport were the two big river ports. Now here in Weston, there was, for example, there were people who helped. There was a lot of people who didn't, a lot of people who did not want that system to change, as you can imagine, because they're making money off of it. Now, there was a Reverend Frederick Starr here, and actually he has a connection back to Angela's great-great-grandparents, I believe. He brought them into his Presbyterian church. He came here in 1850, and he started writing letters back to his father to kind of reveal what life was like here. That's a primary source document for a historian. That's huge to have a primary source document. And he was telling his father that he started a school for black children in the Hulse home, which was, he described it at 1017 Spring Street. And he lived there till he moved into the Presbyterian manse, is my understanding. There's not a lot of real detailed history about Reverend Starr. He told his father he once attended a meeting of the Platte County Defense Association. Now, that was the local militia that really, they were slave patrollers. They were looking for runaway slaves. And by this point in time, the border war was kind of over. Kansans weren't coming over and raiding so much, and Missourians weren't going over into Kansas and raiding, but they maintained this militia, and they were looking for runaway slaves, and they went over into Kansas looking for those slaves. He went to one of their meetings, and because they were making life uncomfortable for him here in Weston, which is, you can well imagine, small town, everybody knows everybody knows everybody's business. He tried to explain to him, I'm not an abolitionist. I'm not trying to make everybody free, but I do want to have this black school for slave children, and people need to be educated. And they made things a little bit warm for him, and that didn't really work. He ended up having to leave in fear of his life, which actually happened to a lot of people during that time. If you didn't go along with the slave culture with the majority, you were pretty much out. Nobody's going to do business with you. You can see that today in the two different cultures that are going on.
And yet we are a noble people. There is a vitality about the Negro. Work him, whip him, sell him, and he still lives and clings to America. My friends, the destiny of the black American is the destiny of America. The chain that binds the slave, that chain is tied to the neck of his master.
During Reconstruction, 16 blacks served in Congress, more than 600 were elected to state legislatures, and hundreds more held local offices across the South. The pipe dream of equality was starting to look a little bit brighter. By the 1870s, Democrats in Platte County were back in power, as they were in much of the South. This is when blacks found out that the reality of Reconstruction was nothing more than a pipe dream. Consider this. Hyam Rebels of Mississippi was the first black elected to the U.S. Senate in 1870. But after Reconstruction, there wouldn't be another black U.S. Senator until Edward Brooks won a seat in 1966. After Reconstruction, all the opportunities that had been given were slowly taken away through draconian and social movements and apartheid legislation. To revoke the vote from blacks, most of the former slave states established literacy tests, poll taxes, or grandfather clauses. This meant that unless you could decipher a sentence written in Greek or Latin, paid an exorbitant amount to vote, or could prove that your grandfather voted, you were barred from voting. By the beginning of the 20th century, black men down south could not vote in most local, state, or national elections. And segregation started in earnest because of the landmark 1896 Plessy versus Ferguson ruling eventually established the doctrine of separate but equal in the classroom. With fewer economic opportunities, more exposure to oppression, Weston's black population continued to dwindle. Blacks began migrating to St. Joseph and Kansas City, where they were most likely to find work and safety in numbers. Jim Crow became the household name, and the lynching of blacks became the new norm.
Today we are remembering one of those descendants who started life right here in Weston in 1875. Given the rather grand name of George Washington Ellis, we get our first hint that his family expected great things of him. We know that his mother was intent on young George receiving as much formal education as possible. The colored children's school here in Weston went only through the 8th grade. So George and Amanda sent their gifted young son to Atchison, Kansas to complete high school, which he did by the age of 15. He was then accepted to the University of Kansas School of Law and graduated from there in less than 3 years. He secured a job in Washington, D.C. as a clerk in the Interior Department, and from there was appointed Secretary of the American Legation to Monrovia, Liberia, West Africa. The American Legation was a precursor to the original American Embassy. So, one can only imagine what a sense of wonder the eager young diplomat, George Washington Ellis, must have felt upon arriving in Monrovia in 1902. In Liberia, he could enter any business or restaurant through the front door, sit where he pleased, expect to be waited on promptly and respectfully. He could make eye contact with all he met. He didn't have to step off the sidewalk onto the muddy street when white people passed by. Everywhere he turned, he saw black professionals and skilled artisans. He was called Sir and Mr. instead of boy or worse. No doubt George Washington Ellis felt relief to be able to escape the American caste system and his preordained place in it. He was a prolific writer and scholar, and time constraints forbid me from going into those in detail. In his short life, the son of Weston, Missouri, makes me cry, set out on a journey that would take him far away from this very Mill Creek, where he was likely baptized and played alongside, away from the fields and warehouses where his father was a laborer, and away from his beloved mother, Amanda Jane, who surely missed her gifted, handsome son, but knew that he needed to go to where he could have a better chance to realize his full potential. And this is the gift of the spirit of Juneteenth. And I'm honored to say his name and that of his family and tell you his story today, exactly in the spot where his greatness started.
As a volunteer fireman, Raymond had answered the call to the fire department at a home on 5th Street. And as usual, he was carrying furniture from the upstairs level down to the ground floor. At some point during that, he collapsed in the front yard. We didn't have an ambulance here at that time, so he was placed in the police car, and he was rushed to Cushing Hospital in Leavenworth, where he was pronounced dead. But his obituary goes on to talk about how people in the community were at such a loss and it was such a tragic event. He was only 31 years old, but look what he had accomplished. People said that Weston would never be the same without Raymond. So, as I said, it had been my goal for many years to see that he was included on the Firefighters Memorial, which is in Kingdom City, right off I-70. Raymond's name is now on the memorial as a line of duty death.
It was on a visit to the Weston Historical Museum in November of 2017. I was looking around and I came upon a display that told me that there were many, many African Americans here in Weston, a large population back in the mid-1800s, and that 400 of them were buried in Laurel Hill Cemetery with no marker.
Wow.
And I was stricken. I left the museum, went home to gather up my husband, and we went right up to Laurel Hill Cemetery to see if this was true. And there was a placard right inside the gate and verified that this was in fact true. So a little bit down the hill from the gate, we looked out on the grounds of the cemetery and they were bare. And I knew there were 400 souls under there with no marker.
The style of burial for African Americans was often just as a piece of cattle, a part of the livestock. They didn't have anything like a casket. They often didn't even have much more than a blanket to bury them. So that having no markers is not unusual. It's just the disgrace of it all.
And this is when the Friends of Weston group came along and they were interested in helping with the project. In the midst of all this, Angela became aware of this project by reading a headline in the Weston Chronicle that said, no longer forgotten, and of course her ancestors are buried there, so she was delighted that this memorial was going to happen.
For those of you longtime Westonites, you may recognize the name Carolyn Larson. She authored a couple of books, including We Too Lived, the book behind the memorial to the 400 black souls buried in Laurel Hill Cemetery. I'm Jess Larson. For me, growing up as a daughter of one of Weston's most prolific historians means I have some crazy big shoes to fill. And you may expect a lot from me, but let's be honest, I'm not my mom. But I am my mother's daughter, and that means I was born with the drive to seek positive change in this world. Thank you for coming today. I think you being here is the next chapter of a story about race in Weston. Race in Weston has been like the river. Once diversity played a major role in everyday life, then it disappeared, taking opportunities for understanding, shared cultures, and inclusive enrichment with it. Is it too late? Has our community become so homogenous that we can't attract other races, ethnic backgrounds, and diverse cultures? Have we become so exclusive that our current history is no longer as rich and layered? I hope not. And seeing all of you here makes me think you feel the same. I'm Carolyn Larson's daughter. She was a mother of 7 who fought off 5 bouts of cancer and heart disease. During her life, she made it her mission to write the story We Too Lived, telling untold stories, making sure people heard the hidden tales of the lives of the forgotten. She would be so proud to see her town celebrating Juneteenth. And I know she is resting easier knowing you're here taking these steps with us. And most of all, the woman who studied the past would be excited about a future of change. Thank you all for coming.
In closing, let me say this. I know that currently and politically we're going through a little change, and that's putting things mildly. We keep hearing about Black Lives Matter, about Blue Lives Matter, about all lives matter. Sometimes the rising conflict in this nation terrifies me when I turn on the television, when I see brother against brother and father against son. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that this scared me. It didn't cause me to falter. But I don't totally lose faith because of two reasons. For one, I have faith in God. For two, I have faith in the history of this country. Look, I'm not here to debate 1619, the Patriotic Commission, or your preference for sitting or standing for the flag. I'm simply here to present the facts. I'll let you sort out the rest. However, understand one thing. Everyone did not come to America the same way or the same purpose. Indeed, there was an entire race who were brought here against their wills, and another was virtually wiped out, having this land taken from them. We have got to allow for differences. To me, America's biggest strength has always been its diversity. Its diversity, its reliance of thought. A people united. We have always come together when we needed to, and I have faith that we will do so again. Unfortunately, sometimes, and I tell my classes this, sometimes to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs. And right now, America's going through that time. But we know that America's far from perfect, and it's still a work in progress. But it's our country, and that's why we have events like this, so we can remember, we can improve, and we can move on. Thank you. God bless.
You know, as a charter member of the Black Ancestors and Awareness Campaign of Weston, it is our desire to make Weston's Juneteenth Heritage Jubilee an annual event. We're also raising funds to establish a monument dedicated to the lives and contributions of Weston's historic people of color, and the reinstallation of the cemetery sign that was removed in order to erect an African American monument at Laurel Hills. And last but not least, an all-important sister museum to highlight the legacy and heritage and lives of Weston's Black forefathers and mothers. Now, our mission is to recognize, honor, and promote the lives and contributions of Weston's resilient Black community whose labor, talent, and industry resonate in historic Weston to this day. And now my sister Angela Hagenbach will join me.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I gotta keep on walking, keep on talking, marching down the street of ignorance.
How did you like the program?
Oh, it was terrific. It was, you know, I didn't know quite what to expect, but it was wonderful. The music and the history I learned, and it was just excellent.
And the people were so happy, right? Our community, the support, just talking to people that are from town, visitors from outside of town, all I got was nothing but positive feedback about this being an amazing event and historic, right? One of those events where you say, I remember when.
Yeah. And Juneteenth, all I can say, I want to clap and maybe want to dance a little, but Juneteenth, and this is happening. This is historic, and I'm happy to be a part of it.
I'm glad to be a part of that, part of the grand scheme, the bigger, that quilt piece,
right.
Part of this rich tapestry of called the diversity and the inclusiveness that I believe the American dream should be.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.